Welcome to UCP's Speak for Yourself webinar. My name is Randy Moore, and I'm the project manager for Speak for Yourself, and we're happy to present today What Matters to You, a guide to understanding patient-centered research for people with disabilities. A little bit about the Speak for Yourself campaign. It is a movement to build a network of individuals with disabilities who are trained and empowered to become directly involved in the research that improves their health outcomes. Our project is funded by PCOR, and we are very happy to bring together a group of wonderful presenters to tell us a little bit about PCOR, how it applies, and how you can get involved. So our desired outcomes for today are really pretty simple. One, to develop an understanding of PCOR and its significance for the health of individuals with disabilities. Two, to learn why PCOR needs your participation. And three, to identify how to get involved with the PCOR or with PCOR in your community. So to start us off, talking about what PCOR is Dr. Catherine McDonald, who's going to give us a definition and an explanation of what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Randy, and hello, everyone. This is Katie McDonald. I'm a faculty member at Syracuse University and really pleased to be joining with UCP on this project. So what this project is all about is something called PCOR, or Patient-Centered Outcome Research. And patient-centered outcome research is a different way of doing research. So historically, people have gone to school for many years and become experts in doing research. They've trained to become scientists and become expert researchers, and research is in their hands to decide what to study and how to study it and what matters in terms of how we do our work. But patient-centered outcome research is turning that paradigm on its head and saying, you know what, if we're going to do scientific inquiry, we actually need to make sure that we're studying things that are valuable to community members, to the people who are most affected by the topics that are being studied. And so patient-centered outcome research is a way of entering into partnerships, researchers and people who may be users of the healthcare system and who are interested in promoting their health, and to say, what should we study and what are the outcomes that matter to us? So whereas, for example, you can imagine you might have a common cold and a researcher says, you know, if we're going to study the common cold, we should really look at how many times a day somebody needs to blow their nose because they have the cold. And people living with colds say, you know, that doesn't matter to me. I will spend all day blowing my nose constantly, but what actually matters to me is the number of days that I have that cold and whether any kind of medication approach can decrease the number of days I have being sick with that cold. And so community members might say to researchers, what I want you to do is study how we can decrease the days my cold is actually active in my system. And so that's kind of one example that would touch on all of our lives about what it means to do patient-centered outcome research. It means that people from the community, people who aren't trained to be scientists, come to have a say in what kind of outcomes we look at when we do health-related research. So in patient-centered outcome research, we are really able to ensure that the voices of people are heard in terms of thinking through what are valuable healthcare options and what are those healthcare outcomes of interest. And it means that we begin to center on the needs and preferences of individuals and the outcomes that are most important to them within the research process. So it's a way of opening up and kind of democratizing, if you will, the research process. When we do patient-centered outcome research, it allows us to provide individuals and other healthcare stakeholders, so that might be people who provide care support to people, for example, with valuable information that will help them make better informed healthcare decisions. So when we engage in patient-centered outcome research, we seek to understand what healthcare treatments are work and effective and are able to generate the kind of outcomes of interest to people so that we can make more informed healthcare decisions. It also helps there be better communication between healthcare stakeholders and decision makers. And of course, it also provides research decision makers a look into what is important in the day-to-day lives of individuals, and in turn influencing a research agenda that's grounded in what is most important to individuals. So it opens up those lines of communication between patients and their healthcare providers and researchers. So with that shared understanding of what patient-centered outcome research is, I want to spend just a few more minutes talking about disability research as it relates to people with disabilities. And here we'll talk kind of both broadly about health research as well as that which is patient-centered research, which is of course of interest to this project. So first, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because definitions are important, what we're talking about today is what we call scientific research. So while we might do a lot of research in our personal lives, which route is best quickest to get me to the grocery store, or which hospital should I go to because it's closest to my house and I can get there quickest in an emergency. When we're talking about scientific research, we're talking about something that's a systematic investigation. So there's a very clear plan. It's not willy-nilly, it's not ad hoc. There's a very clear plan about how we'll gather information and how we'll make sense of figuring out answers to questions that we may have. And we're trying to generate knowledge that is generalizable so that it could apply to more than one situation. So it's not just, for example, information about me and what route would make sense for me to get to the hospital, but maybe ways to think about at the community level or population level. So when we do scientific research, we might be thinking about how do we learn what people are thinking, feeling, or doing, what kind of health outcomes are they experiencing, what is their quality of life like, and we might collect these data through a variety of ways. We may have a drug trial, we may have a vaccination trial, we may talk to people and do focus groups or survey them. There are a whole lots of different ways that we might gather that information, but when we're doing scientific research, we're really trying to understand something at a population level, how we can think about this information and move forward with it. So what I want to talk about briefly today is where we are with research in people with disabilities, health research in particular. So I want to talk a bit about yesterday, where we've been, today, where we are now, and tomorrow, where we hope to go, and how this project hopes to get us towards better tomorrows. So one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is that historically, in years past, many researchers have left people with disabilities worse off as a result of them having participated in research. In other words, scientists have sometimes harmed people with disabilities in the guise of doing scientific research. One example of that occurred at an institution in New York State. It's Willowbrook, which was an institution for children with developmental disabilities. And there, the quote-unquote scientists wanted to study the natural history of hepatitis. And so in their minds, they thought, well, these are people who live in congregate care. They're going to be exposed to hepatitis and likely contract it anyway. So what if we just go ahead and infect them deliberately with hepatitis? We might feed them stool extracts or we might inject it, and that will allow us to study its natural progression. They didn't really tell families all of what was happening and what they were doing, and particularly the harm that might come of their children. And they also kind of offered them the opportunity to get into the institution and bypass the wait list if they agreed to be part of this study. As you can imagine, this has led a bad taste for many. Many people with disabilities don't trust researchers because there's been a history of things like this where they've been taken advantage of in the name of science, sometimes without their consent and often without being informed. So that's a bit about the history of where we've been in terms of research with people with disabilities. And you fast forward to today, and one of the things that we know is that people with disabilities experience a host of negative health outcomes. In fact, they experience disparities in terms of health and health care outcomes, meaning that they have disparate outcomes compared to people without disabilities. We also know that scientific research can be a keen partner in terms of promoting the health and well-being of people with disabilities. And yet, we walk in this history of having exploited people with disabilities and taken advantage of them and hurt them without also always benefiting them in the name of science. So today, when we talk about health research with people with disabilities, we have to take into account the marginalization of people with disabilities. We have to think about the ethical issues that come into play in terms of engaging people with disabilities in research. And we have to think about the feelings of distrust and disrespect that they feel as a result of the history of having been taken advantage of at the hands of scientists. And all of these things often discourage and limit research with people with disabilities. And so today, it often happens that a lot of research doesn't include people with disabilities. So sometimes they're explicitly excluded. And sometimes it's simply because outreach does not accommodate or is not accessible to them in terms of finding out about research participation opportunities, and they therefore are not included in the research samples. But people with disabilities on a broader level also have little opportunity to influence research. Very few of them are researchers. That's increasingly changing, but it's certainly not true to the extent that we would like it to be. People with disabilities are not represented on grant review panels either in terms of shaping the directions of what will be funded and things of that nature. And importantly, because it's been scientists largely without disabilities, without the lived experience of disability directing health-related research, research hasn't always addressed the priorities of people with disabilities. It's addressed what is of theoretical or academic interest to researchers instead of community members. And when we've done research, it hasn't always included what we call knowledge translation, which means taking what we find and putting it into action, applying our research findings in order to promote the health and well-being of people with disabilities. So that's where we've been, and that's where we are. We also want to think about where to go and how the Speak for Yourself campaign can help get us there. So where we want to go is we want to start pursuing research with people with disabilities that is safe, that does not hurt them, but that's also respectful of them, that shows them respect, that earns their trust, for example. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by taking principles of the disability rights movement and thinking about how do we infuse them, those principles, into the research process. So nothing about us without us is a beloved slogan of the disability rights movement. And we can think about the implications of nothing about us without us for how we do research. So what if we begin to directly involve people with disabilities in things that impact their lives, including research? So we make sure that people with research have a say over what kind of research we do, what we study, how we study it, how we engage people, what we do with our findings. So in other words, make sure that we have people with disabilities who become research partners. But also, how do we make sure that we have people with disabilities included in our research samples? So both of those things are very important to do. We also know, undoubtedly, that people with disabilities want to be included. So I've included in here a couple of quotes from some of my research partners and research participants with disabilities talking about their desire to both be a partner in research to help direct and control research agendas, but also to participate directly in research as a participant, as part of the sample. We're part of the community. Everybody has something to give. Why should people be excluded because there's something wrong with their legs or something wrong with their arms or something wrong with something else? Another one of my participants said, you need to let your voice heard, kind of echoing the idea that it's important to speak up and to be part of the scientific record. And another one of my research partners said, I know that for things to change, researchers need my input. And lastly, there are different insights with different people like the professional and the self-advocates and the investigators. You learn from one another. That last quote in particular really speaks to the idea of patient-centered outcome research and how that changes or shifts how we conduct research. So I'm showing you now a graphic which talks a little bit about the research process so we can think about research unfolding in three big areas. First, we develop our research. What are we going to study and how are we going to study it? Do we need to have a drug trial and have people take medicine and record, how many days they have their cold or how well they're sleeping at night? We need to find funding so that we can pay to do that study. We then implement that study. So we find people who are willing to take our cold medicine and willing to keep a diary of their next cold for a week to see how their health is. And we analyze that data. What did we find? Did people who had our medication do better than people who didn't have our medication, for example? And then we disseminate. We share what we found. And we think about, what are the practical applications of that and how do we create change based on what we found? And what this graphic shows is that when we do something like patient-centered outcome research, there's both a voice for researchers, scientists, if you will, but also for community members. And each of us have a different, but equally valuable contribution. So for example, when we open up, when we democratize the research process, we make sure people with disabilities are part of that process, part of the teams that direct research, and they help make sure that any project that's happening reflects community priorities, is relevant to the community, that participation in the study is accessible, it's safe and effective recruitment, and also making sure that what we found, that the word gets out to the community. that it's not just in academic libraries, for example. And this is a very different way of doing research. When we have people with disabilities engage in patient-centered outcome research as research partners, it means that we increasingly have research questions and interventions, proposed and studied interventions that are relevant to people with disabilities or desired by people with disabilities. It means that we have respectful and equitable inclusion in research, so the ways that we engage people reflect principles of human rights, conveys more dignity to people, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, meets the priorities of people with disabilities. It also means that we are better able to make sure that our research participation opportunities are accessible, that we have different ways to communicate, for example, that we hold our research in accessible locations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We also, when we partner with people with disabilities, we're probably going to design research projects that are less harmful and increasingly beneficial to the people who participate as well as the broader community of people with disabilities. So in short, when we democratize the research process, when we do patient-centered outcome research with people with disabilities, we have better science and we have better outcomes for the community. So it's an incredibly desirable way to do inquiry. So it just means that when we are able to do this, we have more accessible, respectful research on the outcomes that are important to people with disabilities, right? So not just the outcomes that matter to scientists, but the outcomes that matter to people who are living every day with disability. And it also means that we do more knowledge translation, or we make sure that our findings get applied into practice to create change at the community level. To give just a couple of examples of what it looks like when we democratize the research process and we enter into partnerships with people with disabilities, is one of the really important things we do is make sure that research participation is accessible. So in general, we're trying to remove barriers to research participation and provide support. So for example, we make sure we hold our research in accessible locations. So there are elevators, for example, or ramps, or there's Braille available to wayfind through a building. We make sure that we recruit people in a variety of ways. For example, many people with disabilities have very different living situations and they access information in different ways. So some people don't look at their mail because they don't trust it, or they can't read, or they can't see what's coming into the mail. So how do we make sure we get audiovisual recruitment methods out, things of that nature. We might read material aloud to people. We might show them very concretely what it means to be part of the research process. And just in general, it means that we provide accommodations in order to be part of the research, and we're flexible in order to accommodate individual needs. So this is where we want to go. With the Speak for Yourself campaign, we're all about how do we promote patient-centered outcome research with people with disabilities. So how do we make sure that people with disabilities become research partners as well as research participants? And so our challenge to you to help create our better tomorrow is to get involved. So for example, you might serve on a grant review panel, and Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute has opportunities to do that. You can apply to be a grant review member. You might find a researcher at a local university and offer to collaborate with them as a research partner. You might find out about clinical trials or patient-centered outcome research trials that are happening in your area or that are happening nationally, that are taking national samples, and you might become a research participant. Now, as you do this, you might want to ask a few questions. Do I think that this research project is important? Do I think that the way they're going about this research is respectful to people with disabilities? Are there any risks or downsides or harms that might come to me by being a part of the research as a participant? Those might be legal, social, economic, psychological, or physical risks. What are the benefits? Are there benefits to me? Are there benefits to people with disabilities more broadly? And what are the researchers going to do to keep me from being harmed? So that's just a little bit of a tease to think about where we've been, where we are, and where we want to go in terms of promoting patient-centered outcome research with people with disabilities. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Gary Robinson.
Thank you, Cindy. So, we'll begin. My name is Jerry Robinson. I'm a PhD candidate at Syracuse University, and my research looks at what I call the life hacking practices of individuals with disabilities. So when we think of life hacking, we typically think of ways to increase everyday productivity and efficiency, but with time, this term life hacking has been used with a lot of different things in everyday life, from cooking and cleaning to housework and schoolwork and work. So there's just ways of doing things that are more efficient and easier or better for you. And so when we talk about disability, a lot of times there's this assumption that if you have a disability, you are the recipient of tools and resources that help you to be productive, but there's never much of a look at what we do on our own to make ourselves productive or to make life easier or better for ourselves. So I'm really passionate about this idea of people with disabilities who life hack and found ways of doing things in their everyday life. And I want to talk about my presentation is kind of build on this idea that you will be able to be with disability. You bring something to the table. You know something about yourself and about your abilities and about what you bring to the table that other people may not know. It's very important for you to communicate that. So, perspective is everything. What do I mean by that? Each one of us has experiences that I'm sorry, let me back up. Okay. Alright, so you have to think about this really as not the sum total of who we are, but rather one aspect of who we are. And all aspects of who we are shape, of course, who we are, how we view ourselves, how others perceive us, how we see and counter what we live in, our everyday lived experiences, and how we interpret those experiences. So besides disability, you have age, sex, race, education, upbringing. All these factors kind of shape who we are, how we see the world. And it's important to realize that all of those disabilities is not the sum total of who we are. It does bear on our everyday life and our experiences. Having disabilities shape how we see and kind of the world. And sometimes that's different than how someone else who may not have a disability, or someone who may be of a different age, a different sex, a different race, etc., they might not necessarily see things the way we see it. And we need to be aware of that because a person's disability status makes a difference. And not only how you see the world, but it may even lead to common or non. It may lead to shared experience and it may not lead to shared experience. So what do I mean by that? I mean simply, even if two people have the same disability, there's no guarantee that those two people will have the same experience or see things the same way. Because again, this was one of many factors that shape who we are and how we see things. So, I want to talk about lived experience and how it kind of shapes our understanding. A person who's denied a disability may not view things from the same perspective as someone who does review it, and vice versa. So I'll give you 3 examples. So let's say you have a curb cut in the sidewalk. Now someone who has a baby stroller, or someone who uses a wheelchair, or someone who is visually impaired, or someone who mean that they have a disability or that they'll value their curriculum very differently. They may all see the value in it, but they may not attach the same value to it. Another example, let's say you have a young child in grade school, and he or she had to wear a helmet. Maybe this individual falls a lot. They have to wear a helmet to protect their ears in case they fall, or they have to use different assistive technologies that their peers don't have to use. Well, to someone at the outside, they may think the other tutor may point or say something, or they may say, hey, there's no big deal, you know, if it helps you, it helps you. But to that person who's using it, those perspectives don't necessarily make them feel like, okay, this is fine. They may still feel stigmatized by using this specialized device, even though it may help them, even though it may be useful, even though it may be a protective measure. That doesn't erase the potentially stigmatizing impact of having and using those things. And then the third example, so let's say you have a disability, and people, well-meaning people, they want to help you, and then they see you on the bottom, they run to you. They say, can I help you? And you may not need any help at the moment. Or another example, you may need help, or you may need a certain type of assistance, but the person may make assumptions about how they can help you, and they're not willing to listen to how you want them to assist them. All of those kind of evidence of how people with and without disability can see things differently. Someone without a disability may not devalue or mean to hurt someone with a disability, or because they don't share the same experiences, because they don't share their knowledge of a person and what they can and can't do, they may not be able to. It might take a little work for them to understand and to truly help an individual. Individuals that disability shape how people think about issues related to disability in different ways. And I kind of just shared that by examples, but I mentioned specifically someone with and without disability. But it works in other ways. Two people have the same disability, they may or may not see things the same way. Two people with different disabilities, they might not see things the same way. One person lives with a disability versus one who does not, of course, they might not see the same thing the same way. And again, I'm kind of reiterating the fact that lived experience really shapes each individual differently. And then you go through all that, and then you run, and then you succeed in, and then you want to grow in, and then you want to go in, and everything about you that happens and occurs in day-to-day life shapes you. And that makes you unique, that makes you an individual who is unique, who may have shared experiences with other people with the same disability, or with different disability, or with no disability. There may be some shared interests, there may be some shared perspectives, but there will always be something that those other individuals will not be able to understand fully and completely the way that you do. So, lived experiences versus perceptions. I kind of know these on the last slide, but I think about lived experience versus the perception of one's lived experiences. So until as people, all people, we have goals, we have capabilities, we have needs. And when I say goals, I mean immediate and long-term desired outcomes of our efforts. You You may be going to school and getting a degree because you want some job. Or you may be taking cooking lessons because you want to become a better cook, or you want to learn how to cook for yourself. You may be reading a book because you want to gain more knowledge about a topic that interests you. Don't live them for the goals. Capabilities, what someone can accomplish or achieve, irrespective of the method. And when I say irrespective of the method, you may be able to do something on your own. You may be able to do something with assistance. You may be able to do something with or without assistance technology. It doesn't matter. The thing you can do, the thing you can accomplish, those are your capabilities. And then you have needs. And needs is something what you must have to live and function as an individual. So these three things can either be, I think about these on two levels. So there's your actual goals, capabilities, and needs, and there are your perceived goals, capabilities, and needs. By actual, I simply mean what you know about yourself in terms of your goals, capabilities, and needs. So you as an individual living your unique life, you know what you can do, you know what your goals are, and you know what your needs are, because you live it. You live that life, and you know yourself. Perceived, on the other hand, is what other people believe or assume about you in terms of your goals, capabilities, and needs. And perceived may not be, perceived can be good or bad. Perceived may or may not be informed by actual goals, meaning a person's perception of what you can do may not be incorrect. They may know you well enough to know what you can do, to know what your goals are, to know what your needs are. But they may not. And it's also a perceived as you look down in the lived experience of other people. So again, it's, imagine you have a friend who you hang out with every so often, and one day, that you tell them, hey, I would like to be a novelist one day. That's one of my goals. And this person may not be a writer, that they may not have anything, they may be more of a cook or a chef or some other profession. So when you tell them you want to be a writer, they kind of look at you, they may not have anything wrong with that, but they may not understand from your perspective. As someone who is, crafting your art of writing, someone who's written articles or written books or novels, someone who has done what you want to do or has set out to do what your goals are, you have a different perspective than someone who knows you, who may know you, but may not know everything about you. So perceive that you want to believe or assume about you in terms of your goals, capabilities, needs. It may or may not be true. It may or may not be grounded in what you actually can do and what you actually need and what your actual goals. But it may. It could be. So I kind of on this thing though, but sometimes gaps occur between actual and perceived goals, capabilities, and needs. And the gaps can occur when sorry. Those gaps can occur when someone's perception of your goals, capabilities, and needs do not match your actual capabilities, goals, and needs. So when there's a gap, that means when someone perceives about you not true. And when that happens, a lot of times the person making the assumption about you may have no familiarity with your actual lived experiences, or even the familiarity of any experience of any person with disability, or they may have had limited access, or they may not just have ever asked you, what about this, what are your goals, what are your needs? The person may have authority to make decisions based on their perceptions that will affect you as an individual with disability, and that can be very troubling. The fact that can impact your life, you definitely want to be informing them and letting them know what the actual goals, your actual goals, capabilities, and needs are. And then sometimes people it's very important to be inform them when their decisions, when they have the authority to make these decisions, but when they have to make these decisions, then you have to remember the consequences. And that making decision that's going to impact your life, but you don't have any input, that can be very damaging, very restrictive, it can actually hurt you more than help you, even though they may intend to help you. I gave like 3 examples of when that gap becomes problematic. So think about any that designs products, accessibility products. So if they design those products with some assumption about the users, let's take a mobility device. So they assume that, hey, we can make this device, but we don't need to give this walker a feature that you may find useful, but they assume, hey, this person never used this feature. They'll never do X, Y, Z, so why do I need this feature? That will impact you downstream in everyday life. Also, when people, in the services to people with disabilities, when they operate on incorrect assumptions, they may think they're helping you, but they're really not, because the help they're providing is based on their perceptions and not your reality. And then, of course, medical professional researchers is a huge one. If your doctors or people from providing health care or providing the service you need don't understand your needs, capabilities, and goals, they can have it in the interest of helping you, leave you more restricted, maybe unable to achieve your goals, unable to live up to your full potential, and kind of needing more than you would otherwise, because they didn't take time to understand you and what you already brought to the table. So, once you brought to the table in a good segue into the next section, what role can you play, or what role should you play in bridging the gap I just talked about? So, one thing you have to know that because of your daily lived experience as someone with disability, you can make a meaningful contribution to reconciling people's perceptions about you to reality because of your knowledge of your actual goals, capabilities, and needs. Now, I do want to say something really quickly. Knowledge comes in different forms. There's technical knowledge and there's experiential knowledge. And both of them are needed when it comes to your care, when it comes to your healthcare needs, both of them are needed. Of course, we need doctors, we need researchers, we need the research studies to build on previous knowledge and build our knowledge base. But that alone, without your experience, will not tailor the service you get, be to your specific goals, capabilities, and needs. You also bring an intimate awareness of your personal history and daily life experiences. So you know what you can do. You know what you achieved over the years. You maybe even did some research yourself on certain procedures, certain healthcare approaches. So you got to bring your own personal history, your own personal knowledge base to the table, and it's grounded in your experiences. And so, again, that's something that no one else brings to the table. No one else knows you like you. Again, that gets to the third one. You have a unique personal perspective as an individual with disability. Again, no one knows you as well as you know yourself. And then you have a personal stake in the outcome. So when you're talking about people making decisions about your life, the fact that you have a stake in a decision, you are automatically you have the right to say something. You have the right and responsibility to speak up and say, hey, here's what you need to know about me. Here's what you need to know about, what I can do and what I truly need. That's what you bring to the table. And you have to own what you bring to the table. And don't be afraid or nervous or shy about letting people know these things about yourself. Because again, the good knowledge is very important. But your own personal experiences are equally important. So, what are some, I guess, practical ways in which you can bridge the gap? The main thing is enabling others to understand your lived experience, and your actual goals, capabilities, and needs. And I put it up and saying, let other people know what you already bring to the table. And you do this by communicating. Developing a personal willingness to raise, to let people know about yourself, about what you bring to the table. Pushing back against attempts to categorize a group, you or other individuals with disabilities without understanding their actual needs, capabilities, and goals. Not letting others make decisions that will affect your life without your input. Like I said before, if it affects you, you have a right to speak up and let them know, your side of the story, so to speak. Refuse to let others take your voice away. Again, this is something that sometimes we have to develop over time, learning to speak up, learning to, let others know, overcoming that silence, overcoming that. Sometimes some of us may not want to rock the boat, quote unquote. You need to rock the boat because, again, it affects you. Learn to advocate for yourself. Right? In a moment, my colleague Karen will go into that in more detail. But lastly, surround yourself with strong allies. And let's go together. Advocate for yourself and find more allies. Because the more you can learn to speak up for yourself and you surround yourself with people who speak up with you and for you, the more effective your efforts will be. So, the last part of what are benefits of bridging the gap? Why would you want to do this? And there are a few. So first, the most obvious, you will be able to create a better match between your actual goals, capabilities, and needs, and what others perceive them to be. So instead of being a huge gap between what you know and what others know about you, you can start to close that gap And that will lead to more informed decision making. The decision that will impact you, whether it be medical decision or personal, whatever it may be, the more you feel like that, the more informed they'll be. Decision will be informed based on your input. Now, like I said, nothing is better than saying actual those capabilities and needs. And it will also lead to an improved fit between the services you receive and your actual goals, capabilities, needs. Improve service, healthcare, and research outcomes, and improve outcomes in your everyday lives as an individual with disabilities. So, with that, I'm going to end my part of the talk and hand it over to Karen. Hand it over to Karen. So, thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay, so in my part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about self-advocacy. And just before we start, just a little introduction to who I am and why it is that I speak on this. My name is Karen Hisselberger, and I'm the Public Education Associate at UCP National, and basically I help people all throughout the country find resources to get the services and supports they need. But also outside of my 9-to-5 job here, I am very engaged in disability advocacy and activism. And I think that being a self-advocate is a really important skill for anyone to have, whether we're talking in the disability space or otherwise. So with that short introduction, I want to get started. So before we really get started with the larger context of the presentation, I wanted to start by presenting you all with some questions just to think about throughout this discussion. They're up on the screen, but I'm going to also read them off. We're not going to go through and answer these questions. They're just meant to be things that you keep in your mind while we talk. So the first question is, what do the words advocacy or self-advocacy mean to you? What do you think of when you think of practicing advocacy or self-advocacy? Who can be considered an advocate or a self-advocate? Do you know anyone who's considered either an advocate or a self-advocate? And the last question, and one I really want you to think about throughout this presentation, is do you consider yourself an advocate or a self-advocate? And why or why not? And so now we have to talk about what exactly does advocacy, or well, specifically self-advocacy, mean. It's a word that you'll hear used a lot, but what does it actually mean? Well, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, self-advocacy is a noun meaning the action of representing oneself or one's views or interests. So, self-advocacy is literally at the core of what it means to speak for yourself about what matters to you. And so knowing that, so we know that self-advocacy and advocacy are huge key components of turning what we care about into actions that we can take to improve our health care and health outcomes. But we have to think about what does that look like when it comes to our health. And in order to do that, I kind of want to talk about 5 different things to remember when it comes to advocacy in your health. And I'm going to do an overview of them really quick, and then we're going to go through each one of them individually. So when it comes to advocacy in your health, remember that it doesn't have to be big. It can be personal. And it's important to stay focused on what matters. And one story really can make a difference. But we all need a little help from our friends and our networks. So now I want to kind of do a deeper dive into each of these points and really address what each of them mean individually and in the context of being a self-advocate or an advocate when engaging in PCOR. So let's get started on that. So the first one is it doesn't have to be big. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times when people think of advocacy or activism or whatever you want to call it, people think of large-scale actions that maybe get media attention. They think of protests, of demonstrations, of things that require a lot of planning and maybe a large group of people. And those things are really important. But not all advocacy has to be large-scale campaigns. Large-scale campaigns matter, obviously, but advocacy can be simple things that you do. Going back to the definition, when we talk about it being, speaking for your interests or things that matter to you, it can be simply going to your doctor and saying, when I look at my health, these are the things that are most important to me. When we talk about treatments and options from here on out, I'd like to keep those things in mind. So it can be done on an individual level. It doesn't have to be some big thought-out campaign, although those things are important. Advocacy isn't one thing or one specific set of actions. It's a way that you choose to act and live, and it's all about knowing what's important to you and being able to express to other people those things and why they're important, and coming at it from a space of being willing to be vulnerable and being willing to open yourself up to people's reactions to what you say, knowing that you're doing it for the greater good of making a difference and making a change and making sure that the choices and the life you have reflect the core things that matter to you. So going off of that, the next point is it can be personal. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when we do any kind of work, we think that we have to separate it from ourselves. But when it comes to self-advocacy around your health, don't be afraid to make it personal. After all, PCOR is focused on what is important to individuals and communities, as opposed to being focused on maybe what is the interest of the academic community. And that means that it's okay to make your issues personal. It's okay to use your story and your needs as the driving force behind your advocacy, because it is your story that serves as the reason behind what you're fighting for. It's your experiences that make you say that these are the things that are important as opposed to other things. And you don't need to necessarily have to be able to pull up tables and figures of facts as an advocate. Being able to tell your story and explain succinctly why something is important to you is valuable too. It's not about proving that it's important to every other person who experiences your condition. It's about proving that this has value, whether it be I want to research ways that I can live more independently, or I'd really like to research cure, whatever it is for you. It's okay to use your personal experiences and your stories as the backing behind those needs and wants and desires. And going from there, it's also important when engaging in advocacy and self-advocacy to stay focused on what matters. And no matter what the context is, advocacy can sometimes be frustrating and disheartening, regardless of how passionate you are about something or how important a certain issue is to you. It's very, very likely that not everyone that you come in contact with will see things the same way you do, even people within your own community, which is why this is an important point. Just because not everyone agrees with you doesn't mean your issues aren't worth pursuing. And on a practical level, this means that not every research study that is related to your condition, your primary condition, or even the issues that you care about will be something that you want to participate in, and not every stakeholder or researcher or doctor will be somebody that you have the right fit with. And that's totally okay. Always remember the issues that are at the core of your work, and make sure the actions you engage in are to further those things that are most important to you. And just because an issue is important to other people in your community doesn't mean that it resonates with you. With the same condition, some people can want ways to make things more accessible in the life they're living now, and other people can want things to further a cure, and both those things are equally valid, but it doesn't mean that you as an individual are going to want to engage in everything, and that's completely fine. It's about finding the things that align with your passion and your needs and what it means for you to have quality of life. When we did our surveys, almost everybody answered in some regard that quality of life was what was most important to them when thinking about health research and health outcomes. But when addressing it further, everyone had a different idea of what quality of life looked like. For some people, it looked like greater independence. For some people, it looked like cure. For some people, it looked like better assistive technology to allow them to live the life that they want to live. And all of those things are valid, and all of those things are equally as important. And what I would encourage you to do is stay focused on the issues that matter most to you and engage in those and spend your energy on those, because you can't just engage in everything that comes your way. You'll get burnt out, and you really won't be able to get things done as effectively the way that you want to. So don't feel like in order to be, the best advocate, you have to engage every time you have an opportunity. It's equally as valuable to choose the opportunities that resonate the most with you and where your experience feels the best fitting to anticipate there. So always remember to stay focused on what matters to you, and don't feel pressured to do something simply because you think it should matter more to you than it does. And the one other point we want to make is that one story can make a difference. And what I mean by that is simply that because of the way that PCOR is designed, and the fact that it's grounded in the experiences of individuals and communities, every story really does matter. When engaging in PCOR, worry less about how many people agree with you or other quantitative data, and focus more on the why. Every story matters because each story is an answer to the somewhat abstract question of why certain issues are important, why quality of life is defined in certain ways by members of communities. Stories explain what numbers suggest. Stories get to the core of things. And they show you that you may think you're just one person and that your story won't make a difference. But the truth is, there's an almost guaranteed certainty that your story will make an impact on at least one person. Whether your perspective encourages researchers to look at issues in a different way, or whether your story encourages other members of your community to understand their experiences as part of a larger context rather than thinking that they are all alone. Stories have value, particularly when it comes to health outcomes of underrepresented groups. If we don't know why things are happening, we can't change them. So when looking at issues of access, for example, statistics may tell us that people with disabilities are likely to experience health inequality, but they probably won't tell us why. It's the stories of each individual that will give us the answer as to why somebody is experiencing what they are experiencing. And with that, I want to move on to the last of our points, and this is a really important point, and it ties everything into the next presentation. So we've talked about 4 things, but we have to talk about one last thing, which is that you can do all those things, but we all need a little help from our friends and networks sometimes. And what that means is that you can use your story, you can, be sharing personal things and all of that, and those things all have value, but you can't do it alone. You need to have a network that supports you, even in the smallest steps of advocacy that you take, whether that's somebody who has your back when you go and talk to a doctor about what's important to you so that they can elevate your concerns and your needs, or whether that's a group of people looking to engage in further research with you. It's always important to have other people in your corner, because as much as personal stories matter and individual experiences matter, it's always important to have somebody else who has your back and is going to support you and help you get the word out. So just to kind of close up, there's no doubt that advocacy and self-advocacy can be difficult, but they are an essential part of engaging in PCOR. In order for PCOR to be effective, it needs to actively reflect the wants and needs of individuals and communities. When you experience or notice gaps in your health care, it's important to talk about this with other stakeholders. PCOR is an opportunity to make healthcare options more reflective of individuals, and an opportunity to make sure that underrepresented groups of people are able to access healthcare and health options that reflect their unique needs and desire. But the only way PCOR can make an impact is if individuals and communities are willing to engage with researchers and advocate for the things that matter most to them. If advocacy ever seems too daunting, just remember, it doesn't have to be big, and it can be personal. So stay focused on what matters, because one story can make a difference, but we all need a little help from our friends and networks. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Caitlin, who's going to talk a little bit more about the importance of networking when it comes to PCOR and advocating for what matters to you when it comes to your health.
Thank you, Karen. So, hello everyone, thanks for joining us. I am Caitlin Muser, and I'm the marketing specialist here at UCP National, and I'm going to be talking today a little bit about the art of the network. And what I mean by the art of the network is how to really establish connections and leverage those in your community to really find your voice and find out what you need as an individual with a disability when it comes to future research opportunities in health research, or if you're in a medical situation, it's giving you the ability to really scan yourself internally and really focus on what matters to you, as we've been talking about during this presentation today. So to start off, we have to talk about what we define as a network. And I did some searching, and I really liked the Oxford Dictionary's definition of a network. And they say a network consists of a group of interconnected people or things. And a support network specifically centers around the exchange of information or contacts. So, where do we start? We've got to establish our goals. What are we looking for? What do we want out of this experience as a patient in a potential research or medical setting? We have to start listening and or teaching. This means asking for advice to get to your goals, and most important, establishing what you need out of this experience. And the last step in the process is really all about having confidence and putting yourself out there, because this takes guts and it's not easy to put yourself first. So let's talk a little bit about connection. I've written some questions down, and these are not going to be answered in order. They're more sort of questions to sit with, to use as tools to establish what connection you're looking for and what that ultimately means to you, given the context of health research or in a medical setting when you're trying to advocate for yourself and you need the extra support. So, what does the word connection mean to you? We all need connection for different reasons. What traits do you look for when connecting with others? Are you looking for somebody who's compassionate, understanding, will tell you the truth? Any of these things are important traits to look for in people that you're connecting with. And what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word networking? Because networking isn't always a formal thing. It can be simple as asking for feedback, constructive criticism, or advice. Again, going back to establishing what you need as an individual. Why do we want to form networks? It's because we want to feel as if our voices and concerns are being heard. And this is of particular importance when it comes to matters of our health. And I will add, when it comes to a person living with a disability. Because going back to Katie's notes in her presentation, we have a history as a community of really not being put first, really not feeling like our voices are being heard in these particular settings. So that's vitally important. So we need to talk about finding support. How do you get there? How do you start building a support network and harnessing your connections? So now that you know what you're looking for out of your health and research experience, and know what you need out of your networks, your networking connections, it's now time to find the support. And you have to start somewhere. One thing is location. Look for support in your community. And remember the questions we asked earlier on connection? This is where you need to start establishing common interest. And then, given that we live in an age where everything is so readily accessible and available via the internet, that is a crucial resource. But I will caveat that with saying that you need to make sure you really know what you're looking for, because there does open up that opportunity for things to come into your field of vision that may or may not be accurate or necessarily apply to you. But I really want to talk about social media for a moment. So social media is my personal favorite tool because there are so many ways to create connection and find community online. It's also a great tool when we think about what it means to take ownership of your health as a patient and as an individual with a disability. You can find like-minded spaces, those who can help provide clarity and a shoulder or pillar of support should those questions or issues arrive when you're in these particular settings. So we need to talk about forming our network. So in order to begin forming our network, you have to know what you want from your network. And before we begin our search for connections, here are some points to consider. You need to know what you're looking to get out of this experience as a patient. Remember that this may feel new and perhaps a little scary to turn inward and look at yourself from a perspective of patient or a self-advocate. This may be the first time you've thought about what's important to you. Setting clear goals and expectations to help you establish what you need. And you need to also realize what kind of supports you need, back to what we were saying earlier. What traits are you looking for? What are you ultimately looking for? Are you looking to make those interpersonal connections? Are you solely looking to leverage a network for advice or ways of critical thinking? So we need to talk about networking and self-advocacy, because these two components of really focusing on what is particularly important when it comes to PCOR, these are so intertwined with each other that you can't really talk about one without referencing the other. So once you've been able to consider your goals, expectations, and support needs, think about how you want to express them. You need to be able to find your voice. You know your body and your experiences better than anyone else, and you should feel comfortable being able to ask for the support you need. You need to come prepared. Do your research. Write it down, record it, whatever method works for you. And remember that it's also crucially important to get feedback, because doing something for the first time or doing it once or twice, you always discover new things to consider throughout this process. So it's important to really sort of take stock and take notes of those things so you can constantly and consistently improve yourself should other opportunities come your way in the future. And the most important overarching thing you need to do is just relax, because you have this. You have this. So, how does your network impact your health? You might be thinking, what exactly does having a network mean for my health? And how does this actually relate to health research opportunities? Well, I'll tell you. It actually gives you strategies. And those strategies are, one, being able to create an open dialogue with either the researcher, your medical professional, or your specialist, whatever context or situation you may be in. It gives you the ability to think critically and ask for feedback. Because like we said before, this may be your first time diving into this world of self-advocacy, or this may be your first time diving into the world of patient-centered research. And so one of the things, like I said, to take stock in is to constantly take note of things that you need to improve upon, because that's human nature. That's who we are as people. We constantly need to look to improve and look to take notes for things to just make ourselves more aware for future opportunities. And it also helps us to develop those kinds of strategies. It gives us that keen sense of awareness when it comes to what we want and what we need and what is important to us as patients, as individuals with disabilities, and gives us the ability to create a way to be able to articulate what we need to our medical or research professionals. And then it always helps to build your confidence. Because the more you do this, the better you're going to become. And you have to realize that the people that you've established these connections with, these people that you've sought support from, these networks that you've helped to build and create, that's what they're there for. They're there to be a source of information, a source of support, a source of advice, anything that you need. And that only helps to grow your confidence and really, really focus at the end of the day on what matters.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you are coming away with a better understanding of PCOR and how it can be used to improve and shape the lives of individuals with disabilities and their caregivers. We are excited to hear what you think. To hear about how you think you can apply PCOR or how you can get involved in it. We look forward to your feedback via comments or Facebook or Twitter. We hope that you also visit us online for links to resources to help you along the way, including a toolkit that covers what we discussed today and also provides some guidance for how to get involved with PCOR. Thanks again. We look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.